So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Shauna Randolph. I'm the head of business development for Tough Leaf. Yes, I'm the person who's sending out all those emails, so you can put a face to the name. Hopefully you're not disappointed. I'm here with Courtney Raymond and Derek Nutty from Constrafor, one of Tough Leaf's valued capacity building partners. So Courtney and Derek, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Excited to meet everyone, kind of go over some of the programs and just get to know everyone.
Nice, cool. So let's talk about today's webinar. So for contractors, consistent cash flow is essential to keeping their businesses alive. Yet the reality is that subcontractors often face significant financial strain due to payment delays. Today, we're going to explore how some contractors counter these issues through early pay programs, or EPP. Courtney and Derek will explain how EPPs work and how businesses can use them to fund growth while managing costs. They'll also cover practical tips on incorporating EPP costs into your bid strategy to maintain profitability, identify key customers, and strategies for confidently raising bid prices. We'll have a live Q&A so you can get advice tailored to your own business needs. Feel free to add your questions to the chat as we go along, and we'll collect them for the end. This webinar will be recorded and emailed to everyone who registered in about a week. So let's go on ahead to the next slide. So before we get started, let's a little bit more about Tough Leaf. At Tough Leaf, we connect certified firms like women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and others with general contractors, developers, and owners to achieve their project participation goals and requirements. As a mission-driven company, we aim to provide opportunities to diverse firms at no cost and support them by providing a trusted group of capacity building services so they can grow and scale their businesses. The next slide. So how can you get the most out of working with us? First, if you haven't already, please visit our website, toughleaf.com, sign in, and verify your profile on our platform. That way we can be sure to send you relevant opportunities in your area absolutely free. Keep an eye out for us. We'll reach out via email and phone about projects that match your capabilities. You can also sign in and find some of the jobs we're currently working on. Stay in the loop. Follow the educational content on our blog and connect with our capacity building partners by visiting toughleaf.com/partners. And of course, you can follow us on X and LinkedIn. So now let's all make sure we're all on mute and we're ready to take notes. I'm excited to hand it over to Courtney and Derek for the presentation. So Courtney and Derek, take it away.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. My name's Courtney Ryman. I lead the strategic partnerships over here at Constrafor. I've been in the industry for about 12 years now, starting my career as a supplier. I actually worked for Mohawk Industries, if any of you are familiar. But I've been involved in construction my entire life. So my grandpa, my dad, my brother, they all have their own construction companies. And I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
Hey everyone, Derek Nutty. I've been in construction also about 12 years. I went from commodity sales to working for small hand tool companies and then into heavy machinery sales. So parents have always been kind of involved in construction. So it's been around my whole life, but on a resume, we'll say 12 years.
A long time. But we're just a high level about Constrafor. So it's a solution that enables contractors to manage and grow their business. So we essentially have two sides of the house. So for general contractors, we have a suite of tools here that are designed to manage the entire life cycle of a project. And then for both subcontractors and general contractors, we have what we call an early pay program. So that's where we're going to focus our attention today. And for those that are unaware of what an early pay program is, it's essentially where you get an advance on your approved receivables. The solutions become increasingly popular, one, because it's easy to use, two, it's safe for your business, and we'll go into that later, but three, it also allows you to grow your business sustainably. So Derek, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add here.
Not quite yet, but yes, I mean, the early pay program is primarily for jump starting growth within companies and then sustaining that growth. So
Yeah.
that's what we're going to play, and Courtney will elaborate a little bit more. And then once we get into some of the finer details, I'll jump in.
Yeah. So for today's webinar, we're going to talk about, why using EPP can be so useful, what an early pay program is, right, and what's involved in it, how you can plan to use EPP in your business, and, really how an EPP program can help you. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to you folks on the call here, but subcontractors are consistently slow paid. And this obviously causes a lot of problems given the fact that you have to pay for materials up front, right? And you're constantly paying for labor every week, and not to mention your overhead costs. So, you're doing this for on average of 57 days. So for 2 months, you're carrying these costs on the project before you even see a dime on the project. And obviously that's super problematic, right? And really construction is the only industry that operates this way, but it makes it very, very difficult to grow and, of course, make money. And then, Derek, I don't know if you maybe want to, since you've been in like the back end with the subcontractors more often, if you can speak to like how we can find and maintain skilled labor, like the material prices are super volatile, probably less so than COVID, but still, I'm still hearing that. Maybe you can speak a little bit more towards that front.
Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit in terms of skilled labor. I mean, a lot of the times you're floating the cost for 2 months of these actual jobs. And I mean, if you're looking at some of the specialty trades, it's not like, I mean, you're paying these guys double, triple sometimes of what some regular laborers are making. So, I mean, this can be a huge cash flow burden upon your business. And especially when COVID hit and lumber went up 300%. It was, I mean, a whole different game. So what our product essentially helps with is just speeding up the process of GCs paying you. Now, this does come at a small price, but the cost of capital compared to your growth schedule, I mean, the opportunity cost there pays for itself.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to, like, in construction as far as financing goes. There's a lot of options and it can be super overwhelming. What I will say is that some options are better than others, but it really comes down to strategizing when and where to use the specific types of financing. So on the screen here, you see like 5 different options. I'm actually going to start with one that's not on this screen. It would probably be looped into like a working capital loan, but it's called a merchant cash advance. I want to highlight this because these are extremely dangerous to your business. They're essentially predatory loans where oftentimes they have APRs as high as 350%, usually around 150 to 200%, but on the total loan amount. So if you took a loan for $100,000, you actually owe $200,000. Not to mention there are a lot of hidden fees involved, and I've personally seen really large, stable contractors go out of business by using these. So I just really want to highlight to stay clear here. And Derek, maybe you can speak to like credit cards. I know a lot of people probably have like the unlimited Amex line. So maybe you can speak a little bit more on that.
Yep. So there is the unlimited Amex line. A lot of the times it comes with a 3% charge on every purchase. So a lot of individuals will use this, not knowing that either the cost is hidden in some way when it comes to materials, because a lot of suppliers they'll do cash upon delivery. So it can get people into trouble considering it's a unlimited amount. But the 3% charges that come with it, I mean, if you APR that out over the course of the year, it could be substantially higher than any other line of credit or services that we essentially offer.
Yeah. I also think that, you know, a line of credit it can be super powerful, but on average with the construction industry, because it's all asset backed, like your line of credit is based on your receivables, right? So a lot of times I have literally never seen anybody get a line of credit over 10% of their revenue. And it's oftentimes just not enough. It's not enough to float the cost of the job for 60 to 90 days. So you really need to utilize a few of these financing options to grow the business. One of which I think is super powerful is utilizing your supplier terms. So with your suppliers, ideally you have like a few suppliers that are your go-to, right? You have a relationship with them. When you're just starting out the relationship, more often than not, you are COD, right? You have to pay immediately. Or if you're lucky, you get net 30, that's pretty standard. But the bigger the relationship that you have with those suppliers, the longer the term length, right? So we really want to bridge the gap between when you need to pay for the materials and when you get paid on the job. So some of my customers who have had relationships with suppliers, they actually have pay when paid terms with suppliers. But what I'll say to that is that your terms cost something. It's not going to be a line item, but if you have pay when paid terms, and that's great, but those terms cost money in the sense that, okay, well, what if I actually became COD? And by utilizing an early pay program, essentially. So I had a couple customers that were pay when paid, and they ended up becoming cash customers. What percent does that earn them, right? It's somewhere between 6 to 8%, believe it or not. So it covers the cost of using an EPP program, and even sometimes they make a couple points on their materials. So I definitely think utilizing supplier terms is overlooked. A lot of contractors just kind of take it at face value, like, oh, I get net 30, it is what it is. You absolutely can negotiate your supplier terms, 100%. And really, the other one that I would like to touch on, obviously, is the early pay program. Derek, I don't know if you maybe want to elaborate a bit more on that too.
Yeah, so it's essentially, and I'll touch on, I believe it was Mr. Austin Stephen that was asking essentially the difference between our approach and factoring invoices. So factoring can be a gambit of different products. Like Courtney was saying, it could be MCAs, which are essentially a factoring style product. The difference between our approach, it is a factoring style product, but it's not as aggressive. What we do is we use any of your accounts receivable and we will purchase that, but it's for a 60-day period and it's 4% or less. So if you only want to do it for 30 days, it would be 2% of a receivable. Now, going into the early pay program, it can be extremely beneficial for, as I was saying, the opportunity cost. If you're growing in size, if you're trying to take on larger jobs, just because the financial burden of growing, even when you bid a couple jobs that you didn't expect to win, and now you have to perform, can come into play when you're in a pinch. Now, what Courtney was saying was with the 57-day average of when GCs actually pay you back, I mean, if you have 4 jobs that are starting up at a time and you have to pay the mobilization and carry those costs for 2 months, I mean, it can be detrimental to your business and the growth of it.
Yeah, I think like a big component in that too is just planning. I mean, it goes into every asset of the business, right? But there's only so much that you can plan for. So I think it's super important to have a solid understanding of your financial strengths and even more importantly, the weaknesses, so that you can pinpoint which financing option makes the most sense for your business. And what I'll go back to the factoring versus EPP. So with factoring, it's very similar. It's very similar in the sense that they buy your receivable, right? But the factoring companies, and the reason why factoring got such a bad rep when it first came out is because they insert themselves in the repayment process. So you sell your receivable to a factoring company, they're then knocking down the doors of your general contractors, like demanding payment. And there is nothing more important in this industry than your client, which is your general contractor. You cannot have anybody infiltrating that partnership that you have, because it is truly so important. So with an EPP program, the communication is key, I'll say that, but no EPP program is going to be knocking down the door of your GC. I think that's probably the biggest differentiator. Also, the financing costs associated is pretty drastic, but the biggest thing from my experience is the factoring companies, they want their money and they want it now. And it can really damage the relationship that you have with your general contractor. But these financing options, I mean, there's not like besides like what I'll say is the MCA, there's really not like, oh, you should not use this, because there is a situation in which every single one of these makes sense. But it's important for you to get a true understanding of your financials. There's a lot of time, like Derek and I, we have a lot of financial reviews with subcontractors. And I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of people that they're so busy working on the business that they don't get a chance to work like in the business, right? And like understanding where their margins are at, which GCs pay the best. Okay, so if you have a good GC and they give you good jobs, good work, like start building up that relationship and don't just bid to bid. So there's a lot of avenues here. But I wouldn't say that anything on this screen is necessarily bad, right? There's a place for every single one of these. And with this slide, Derek, I think maybe you should take this. So Derek focuses mostly with subcontractors, so he speaks to them every single day and helps them through processes like this. So Derek, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah. So with it, in each customer is obviously very different. I was going to address Stevens. It looks like you said you had some federal contracts. So I mean, you could have any government projects, you could have private. I mean, there's a gamut of different projects that we'll work with. But what it truly comes down to is what your growth schedule is when you're getting paid back by some of these GCs. You can take into consideration any of your other lines of credit cards. I mean, it's more of it's kind of like a puzzle for each contractor. But essentially what it comes down to is you're trying to grow your business and you're being slow paid. So the opportunity cost that comes with it is, one, you have to essentially pay everybody while still keeping your business rolling, and then shelling out, I mean, 2 months worth of pay or materials or whatever it may be. And this isn't even considering retention, which a lot of the times could be all of your profit that you don't get paid for 9 months to a year. So actually, at this point, I was gonna, if Stephen, you have your mic, I'd love to just ask a question in terms of a scenario for what kind of job you're talking about in terms of federal contract. Stephen. No problem. I'll circle back. I'll circle back
Yeah.
around.
What I'll also add to the opportunity cost portion is when you're using all of your war chest per se, right? All of your cash, your capital is going into you floating for the job, you playing the bank on these projects, that hinders you from being able to take on more projects or bigger projects because all of your money is tied up waiting to get paid, right? So if you didn't have to wait to get paid, you then have this capital that you can deploy on other projects and keeping your project moving and on schedule, right? So you're losing out the opportunity to take on better margin projects or projects with better GCs, like that you want to start building that relationship with. So there's a lot of opportunity cost associated with your funds and where you choose to deploy those funds. There should be no reason why you need to tie up all of your cash waiting to get paid for 60 to 90 days, right? The whole point of this is to free that up so that you can use those funds to mobilize on other jobs, to keep paying yourself, right? And you're no longer dipping into that war chest to float. So you're able to invest it back into your business even. And Derek, I'm sorry to cut you off. If you can keep going. I just feel really passionate about this because especially like smaller businesses, they don't feel like they have the same opportunity. But that's I don't think that that's true. It's just a matter of where you're placing your bets, and using it to your advantage. Small businesses have a lot of advantage in this space, and you can absolutely use that and leverage that to your advantage.
Yeah, and I mean, you pretty much touched on everything, but the only thing is, I mean, you see these massive corporations that are leveraging any of their assets or, I mean, other people's money essentially to grow. They don't ever use their own capital. So a lot of the times, I mean, when you see growing businesses, they will utilize, I mean, like we were saying, credit cards, line of credit, small business loans, whatever it may be, but it's always someone else's capital, which does come at a cost, but it helps with that growth schedule and also leveraging your risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, kind of piggybacking off of that, right? So using EPP to grow your business, again, it allows you to bid on more projects, bigger projects, without having to worry about where the money is coming from. Because there will be times where, especially at the beginning of a project, it tends to take a lot longer to get paid, whereas like the end of the project ends up being a little bit faster because they have the processes and the kinks worked out. But for the first 3 or 4 recs that you submit, it takes a little bit longer than normal to get paid. And that's the time where you're upfront all of the materials, right? And still having to pay for labor and overhead. So I mean, it's using EPP to grow your business in this case, like absolutely you can bid on more projects. I also think since you're no longer dipping into your funds, you're able to invest it back into your business, whether that's buying new equipment, building out a new office, buying a warehouse. So your profit is able to go back into your business to scale your business instead of using those funds to, float the job. And Derek, maybe you can touch on like strengthening the relationships. I think a common misconception is that if they use EPP, the GC is going to look at them a certain way, and that's not the case. So maybe you can highlight that aspect.
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, what it truly comes down to is, do you complete the job on time? Is it within the cost that was on the contract? And I mean, are you not causing any delays to any other trades? In all reality, if you're completing good work and I mean you're on time, then a GC is going to want to work with you because it's hard to find good contractors that do quality work. So a lot of the times what it comes down to is they may look at this and understand that you're growing as a business, and they'll appreciate the fact that you're at least working with them, and it'll help you build the relationship. Now, are these your Hathaway Dimwitties? Are these your McCarthy's? I mean, they're a little bit different. They kind of, they'll hold you to a certain standard, and they'll sometimes have it in their contracts that you're not allowed to sell receivables. But I mean, anywhere for $100 million contractors or general contractors, they'll be willing to work with you because, like I was saying, it's very hard to find good contractors these days.
Yeah, I'll even add to that. So everyone's heard of Turner, right? Turner actually has their own early pay program in-house because they know the issues that are in the industry. This is not like a secret topic. Every general contractor gets it, right? It's all about communication, 100%. And if you're taking the steps to make their project be on time and on budget, and you're also helping yourself out, no general contractor that's worth working for is going to say anything. In fact, they're going to applaud you and work with you. We have so many subcontractors that loop us in with their general contractor to, explain the program or give some more insight. And every single time the general contractor is like, wow, this is great. I'm really happy that you're doing this, not only for yourself, but for me and my project that I have you on. So we have like a lot of referrals actually that way. So I definitely think that using EPP grows the relationship with your general contractor for a variety of reasons. And so a big thing that I really want to highlight is how you can account for the cost of using EPP, because of course it's not free, right? Every EPP program is a little different. What I will say is that it's so important to know the entire cost of using EPP prior to using it. So an example would be some EPP programs have origination costs, some don't. The cost of financing also varies. So do your research, please, please, please. It's so important. And ideally, EPP is something that you plan for. Our most successful contractors bake this into their bids. But it's not something that you really should think of as a last resort. Now, of course, we can't plan for everything because stuff happens all the time. It's still construction after all. But in those cases, talk to your EPP expert. 9 times out of 10, they can help you find a path forward that actually will work for you. Derek does this all the time with his subcontractors. So maybe Derek, you can speak a little bit more towards how they incorporate the cost, offset the loss, and things like that.
Yeah, so a lot of the times, and we touched on this a couple times earlier, but if we do supplier financing, I mean, you can essentially get anywhere from a 4 to 7% discount, depending on the supplier. There's some that aren't as much with the wiggle room. Bidding it early enough in the job so that you understand that you're not going to finance a whole job. But I mean, if you're doing 1% more in terms of your bid, then you're covering the cost of essentially all the EPPs that you would do. And even change orders. If it's something that you never bid into the actual job, change orders are huge. Your margins on change orders are 50% profit margin just because it's unaccounted for and wasn't in the original bid. So the GCs and just kind of at the nature of your mercy. So it's not so much trying to hide the cost, is more of just you already have very slim margins that are hard to meet. And a lot of the times the profit that's in those margins at the end is stuck in retention, like I was saying. So it's one of those where you do have to plan, but if it's a new process that you didn't implement early enough, like I said, change orders or usually supplier financing is where you're gonna make up those margins.
Yeah, and on that same note, like you can't plan for everything, but I mean, for example, like Derek and I, right? We're what I would like to consider EPP experts. We've gotten really creative before with some subs that we're in a really difficult situation, there are so many ways that you can use an early pay program to get out of, the hole, right? One of which I really want to lean on the GC relationships again. These are so, so important. I mean, really, they're the difference between contractors making it or not. Like if you're diversifying between 20 different GCs, you could not possibly have a strong relationship with that many. This kind of goes into like bid strategies and things like that, but you should have about 4 to 5 GCs that you can rely on. And what I mean by this is that they take care of you, right? They communicate with you. And oftentimes when you have quality relationships, you're able to have a bit more flexibility when it comes to baking financing into your bids because they get it, right? Or even better terms on the project. GCs are not the bad guys. They're also having to finance the projects, of course, not to the same extent of the subs, but they want nothing more than to pay their subs as quickly as possible. That's actually my entire role at Constrafor. We have programs with a lot of general contractors who offer early pay to their trade partners. And at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, right? We want the job to go smoothly and we want to make money. So I mean, and it's happening more and more often. Like general contractors are happy to offer the early pay program. They want to offer the early pay program because they get it and they know it works. So that's just one thing that I really, really want to highlight is this is a relationship business through and through. So really hone in on the GCs that are worth your time and are giving you that same communication that you give them. And for, getting comfortable raising bids, Derek, maybe you lean into this a little bit more. I mean, I do want to say that like your brand value as a business is your business, right? So really only bid on jobs that play 100% to your strengths. But I'll let you take this one.
No, and I agree with that. It's difficult when you're trying to win bids because you'll have the individuals that come in, they undercut you by 3-4%, but they're walking away with net 2% at the end, which just doesn't make any sense. And it's not conducive to any of the other subs in the area. So, I mean, if it is a sub that's willing to pay you any kind of mobilization cost, or any GC that's willing to pay you kind of a mobilization cost, or they do with significant completion, they'll cut your retention in half. So you're not waiting for that whole profit at the end of a job. There's ways that you can actually leverage with the GC so you're not waiting as long or you're having to fork up as much money in the beginning or capital. So there's a couple different strategies that generally we look at, and it is mobilization costs, it's baking in the cost of EPP programs, and then just seeing if they do if it's substantial completion for the retention on a job. But those are probably the top 3 for me that I always talk to my GCs or my subs about, because it is huge in the long run.
Yeah, I also want to highlight that it's quality over quantity, guys. Like you don't want to take on every single job. You got to be strategic in the jobs that you take, right? Like what Derek was saying, like this if you lowball, like you're not setting yourself up for success. And in fact, it ends up damaging your brand value, and your brand value is how you win those GC relationships. So I mean, this is a hot take, but it's okay to not, win every job, right? Because those jobs just maybe aren't the best for you. Really focus. I think actually, let me take a step back. I would sit down and create a bid strategy. Like only if it falls into that buy bucket, like then yes, we'll bid on it. But make sure that buy bucket is completely aligned with where you want to take your business. Like don't just bid on a job to bid on a job. Like you should know exactly why you're bidding on that job. And when you do feel that comfort in why am I bidding on this job, you will also get comfortable raising that bid because you earned it, right? Like you earned this job, you owe this job to yourself. So I think it's super important, like when we would have subcontractors that would just throw spaghetti at the wall hoping it sticks, it doesn't do them any service. So I just really, really want to highlight that having a really thought out bid strategy will go a really long ways. Anything else you want to add here, Derek?
No, I mean, it looks like we had a couple questions coming in, so I didn't know.
I think we might save those for the Q&A, which is coming right up. So,
Yeah. No, I think you touched on everything. So yeah, I don't
yeah,
know.
I mean, and we've said this before, but you know, MWBE, they have a lot of advantages. There's a general contractors, and Tough Leaf can probably attest to this because that's literally what they do. Um, General contractors want small businesses on their job. With public projects, like federal projects, there's actually a certain percentage that has to be MWBE. Um, I mean, but then, yeah, they typically take the longest to get paid, but because they have that percentage, you guys have the leverage, right? So you guys can plan ahead and bake EPP into that bid. So even though it takes longer to get paid, you guys are fine. But I definitely think that MWBE has a huge potential to leverage the fact that they're MWBE. And then mitigating the risk associated with any type of work. I mean, using EPP absolutely mitigates risk because you no longer have to worry about when you're getting paid because you already have the money because EPP has advanced you that money. So then you can focus on the job or the next job instead of having to worry about how am I going to pay my guys this week? Like, God, I mean, that's so stressful. So there's just a lot of ways that EPP programs in general can help out. Derek, I don't know if there's anything else you really want to add here. I mean, we've talked about pretty much everything at this point.
No, I mean, you're correct. A lot of public jobs, they do require that a certain percentage of contractors do fall within the WMBE parameters. So it's one of those where you do have the upper hand at times to either bake in the cost, have higher profit margins. I mean, they are required by the state to have a certain percent. So the ball really is in your court for some of those jobs, and I mean the power's in your hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll open it up to the Q&A.
We
I think
have
we already have a few
Yeah.
questions.
No, I can't, time flies. So we
I
have
know.
questions coming through. I'm going to start with a very simple one. In an EPP program, what happens if a GC does not pay within their allotted time?
I can take that. So it's, first of all, it's all about communication. So like, let's say that you and I had an EPP for 60 days and we expect the GC to pay in 60 days, but stuff happens all the time and it ends up taking 90 days. All an early pay program will ask of you is communication. Like, let us know. And we can do an extension. Like, there's a lot of ways of working it out, but it's not a big deal. I mean, honestly, it happens all the time, especially at the beginning of a project where you don't have the pay cycle, right? That you don't have that background, that history to know when you're going to get paid. But if the simple answer is it's not a problem, you just need communication. And oftentimes people can grant extensions to that early pay.
I have a quick question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that the EPP is more advantageous than a bank line of credit. So how many percentage points would you say is the interest that's charged in the EPP program versus if I were to use my line of credit at the bank?
I can take this. So for EPP, what we do is, and I mean, it ranges. If we use our rates, we do 60 days and it's 4% of that receivable. Now, with your bank line of credit, some of the times they have covenants where realistically, I mean, your APR over the course of the year is going to be much better with bank line of credit, but we kind of work in tandem with both, just due to the fact that you can utilize your bank line of credit to, let's say, cover more of your overhead costs. And then anything associated with the job, you can use those receivables, if you've already baked in the EPP, to pay more of your laborers. It could be rentals, it could be suppliers. I mean, it's a gambit of other expenses. So I wouldn't say that one can be used over the other. It also depends on how large your line of credit is. A lot of the times banks, if you go over a certain amount, because they could say you have $1 million, but what they'll do is they'll use your receivables as how much you truly can use. Because if you go up to 100,000 and your receivables are only, let's say, 60,000 over the last 90 days, it'll raise a red flag, and then they'll pretty much audit that line of credit.
I also add, like, the lines of credit are so I mean, they're so important, right? But they're just not enough in construction. Like, banks have a really hard time underwriting construction companies. A great example, I have a client, $150 million subcontractor, right? They're working on the best projects with the best GCs, and they're incredible, right? They have incredible brand value. Their line of credit is $4 million. That is like one receivable for them. There's no way they would be able to use that line of credit to float the cost of their jobs. It's just not possible. So they'll use, the line of credit for, like Derek said, overhead, but really you should use EPP in tandem with your line of credit. They're incredibly complementary. I just really want to highlight that. It's not one or the other. Definitely should be using both.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So we had an early, Stephen Austin had a couple questions, and I know, Derek, you had been kind of addressing them throughout, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to, make sure that you answered the way that you wanted to the fullest. So as a reminder, what is the difference in your approach and factoring invoices was the first question. And then the second one was, do you pay for receivables on a federal contract? The federal government has to pay a small business within 30 days of invoice. What is your time after verification? Will you pay, and what percentage?
Yep. So
by paying for your services?
Okay. Yeah, so the first one of how we differ from other factoring companies. So as Courtney touched on earlier, a lot of other factoring companies will do 150%, 200% of essentially what you need to pay back for your original. So, I mean, you're getting $100,000, you got to pay back $150,000, and it could be within 60 days, which just isn't beneficial. What we do is, and a lot of the time for one specific job, they'll require that you sell all your receivables, not just
Yeah,
one.
that's a big one. It's not an invoice by invoice basis. It's, if you opt in for that project, you have to use factoring on every single invoice for that project. And like, maybe you don't need it for every single invoice. So what our EPP program is invoice by invoice. So it's completely voluntary. You could use this for invoice 1 and then never again, or you could use this for all of them, or 1 and then 6 and 10. Like, it's completely up to you.
And so that's one part of what he said. And
But the biggest difference I would say is like the financing, of course. but also the repayment chain. So in an EPP program, they work with the subcontractor to get their funds back. They're not knocking down the GC door to get the funds back. So I think that's a huge difference, because again, the GC being your client is so important. So we don't want to dip our toes into that relationship. Like, that's your relationship. We don't want to muddy the water.
Yeah, it looks like he's, so he.
So, this is a question from Ray Montalvo. Does EPP mean that the GC agrees to pay you early? The GC expects something from you?
Nope.
Oh, go ahead, Derek.
No, so the only, so we primarily don't want to have any communication with the GC. It's all going to be sub and GC related. We'll be CC'd on an email. But when addressing that, so they don't agree to just pay you immediately. What we do is, let's say you have a $100,000 invoice that you've billed the GC. We'll go ahead and we purchase that receivable. And from there, we'll end up giving you, let's say it's the 100,000. So we'll give you the 100,000, and then when that GC pays you back in the 57 days is when you would pay us back.
So the GC is not paying you early. The EPP program is paying you early. And the GC, you know, when it's time for them to pay back, they would just pay us back because we already paid for it, right? But the GC, like, there's no involvement. They don't expect anything from us, or anything like that. But it's just to reiterate, it's not the GC that pays you early. It's the EPP program that pays you early. The GC's process still remains the exact same.
Okay, just as a reminder, if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat, and you can also let us know if you want to, ahead of time, if you want to come on and ask your question live. But I have another, I see it was already answered, but I want to bubble this up for everybody to hear. Corey Garza made the comment, I have applied through the website. It only allows you to apply for one invoice for one job. Will someone get in touch with me to look at multiple jobs for early pay programs? So if someone wanted to learn, you know, to get a little bit more help with this, would it make sense for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I think I already pinged Corey, and I believe internally it was already sent over to me as well. So I'll reach out and address that. But we can look at multiple jobs and multiple invoices. It's not just a one job, one invoice. We have multiple subs that are having, 5 to 10 jobs going at a time, and we'll advance invoices for each and every single one of them. And we can do multiple invoices for each project.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the chat too, Corey. Yeah, your line of credit, because you lost the line of credit because they want you to pay it down every 60 days. Not uncommon. Like, how crazy. And also during COVID, when the banks started getting really scared, the first two industries where the line of credit was completely pulled, hospitality and construction. So I had a lot of subcontractors who completely lost their line of credit in a day. And then they were like, what do we do? So, it's scary, right? Like, it's extremely volatile. But that's why it's so important, one, for planning, but two, like, using it in conjunction, using EPP in conjunction with a line of credit. But yeah, the banks are only giving us 100,000. Yeah, it's not enough. That's why it really should be used for, like, a little bit of an emergency, or overhead, like a smaller issues, right? The EPP, it would be completely separate of that. And
I have a question from Paulette Baca. Sorry, Paulette, I messed up your last name. What is the charge for $100,000 in 60 days when a GC pays?
so We can talk about that specifically for Constrafor, or like Derek can talk about that, but every early pay program is going to be a little different. With us, we don't have any like hidden fees or origination points or anything like that. But I will say, Paula, it is different. Every early pay program is different. So I just really want to highlight that. But Derek, you can take this one.
Yeah, if we were going to use our rates, and I'm not trying to make this sales pitchy, if you were to go out 60 days, it would be 4%. So it'd be $4,000 for the 100. Now, that being said, and this is one way of strategizing, you don't have to essentially provide an invoice immediately when it's approved. And you also don't have to advance the full amount. And I'll wrap in Steven's question as well. We'll go up to potentially 90% of any invoice. So but you can choose. You can choose if you want to advance only 50% of an invoice. So it kind of depends on how long you're going to have the money or how long you expect it to get. So you can use aging invoices as well. If you have an invoice that you provided 60 days ago, then we can actually look at that as well. It doesn't have to be a recently approved invoice. Sorry. Hopefully that answers.
Getting a little dry.
Yeah, everybody seems to be leaning in a lot. So we're kind of almost to time. I just want to check in one more time to see if anybody has any other questions. Again, you can feel free to come on to the chat, or excuse me, unmute yourself and ask the question, or put it into the chat. Otherwise, Courtney and Derek's email addresses are on the screen. Please feel free to reach out if you want to have a more private conversation. This really is intended to educate you about EPP and the process and the possibilities with it. We hope that you feel like you've walked away learning something. Like, I'm seeing a lot of people coming in again. We noticed that there is a calculator that helps you estimate EPP terms that's been put into the chat. And then it looks like Ray has a question. So let me see if I can find you quickly, or you can bring yourself off of mute.
Yeah, so thank you. I just want to be clear about this. So basically, if we suspect that we're going to need some factoring, on a project, it should be something that we anticipate ahead of time, and then we try to bake in that 4% on the project, hoping that we can still land the project with that extra 4% built in, or maybe less of a percentage baked in if we feel that we can be able to get a better payment deal from our suppliers and from our own subcontractors. Is that basically what the takeaway is from this?
I mean, that's some of them. Yeah. And what I'll actually say on top of that, like, it's 4% of that one specific invoice. But if we're looking at a complete contract, it ends up being around 1%. Like, if you were to use EPP on every single invoice, it's less than 1 point to bake it in, right, of the total contract value. But you're right, like, those are definitely the best ways of looking at it, using it on the front end and the back end, right? The suppliers and the AR.
Okay, the 1%, I didn't hear about it until just right now, unless it was said earlier,
No, it's one of those. You wouldn't finance a whole job. It just doesn't make sense. And we're not in the business of trying to take away profit margin. So essentially what it would be is you're probably looking at maybe 20%, 30% of the actual invoices that you would look at doing an EPP program. And when you take the cost of those invoices in terms of like what our fees would be, it would be 1% or less. So a lot of the times contractors will think, oh, well, I can't add 4% to my bid, I'll lose the job. It's like you're correct, but would 1% cause you to lose that contract? And they're like, that's more realistic.
Yeah, you don't have to raise your bid by 4 points just because you're doing it on one invoice, because unless your job is one invoice, otherwise it wouldn't, you would be raising it way more than you'd need to. But it ends up being like less than 1% of your total contract value.
So long as you are not financing the whole job, but just about 30% of the job. Is that what the story is?
Correct.
And it depends on the job. So we have like a really in-depth calculator that Derek and I have access to. I think that might be a little bit more useful for you, Ray. I mean, we can absolutely set up some time to like actually go through the numbers. The calculator on the website, though, is a pretty good starting point. But if you really want to get into the weeds, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, great. Are you going to be sending this thing out to all of us so that this way we can set up those appointments?
Yeah, I can actually work with Derek and Courtney to include the calculators that we were talking about and the resources along with the webinar recording that should be coming out. So we'll just make sure it's all in the same spot so you all can continue the conversation. Does that work?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
No problem. So we're coming up at time. Derek and Courtney, I know especially Derek has been really active in the chat. I want to give you both the opportunity one last time to address anything that you feel like you might have missed or, just in the chat that maybe you wanted a little bit more space to answer before we say our goodbyes.
Just kind of looking through I think we pretty much answered everything. If I missed something, feel free to ping me now, or you can email me. I'd be more than happy to take the time to hop on a call or just kind of elaborate. But I think we got everything.
Wow, the chat is like really popping off. I didn't realize.
I know this is always the case. Like at the end, everybody's like, what? As soon as it clicks, everybody wants to has a million questions. And this is the reason why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, that brings us to the end of our time. Remember, if you haven't already, claim your profile on toughleaf.com so you can provide you with relevant targeted opportunities that match your profile. Once again, this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with all who registered. Like I said before, don't leave, Shauna. Like I said before, we will work to include, some more follow-up information to help you continue your educational process into this option, which seems to be a lot of opportunity for the people here. Thank you again, Courtney and Derek from Constrafor for being here today, and we look forward to serving our mission with you with your partnership. Thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay cool, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.